The Research Left Behind with Professor Ashley.
Hello and welcome to The Research Left Behind, the only Twitch stream, YouTube show, and podcast, depending on your mode of access, which sweeps the cutting room floor to bring you the research that got left behind. My name is Professor Ashley, and yes, I am a real professor who teaches people how to make video games at New York University. And tonight, I am joined by Dr. Carlos Gabriel Kelly Gonzalez to talk about the research left behind his book, Ready Player One, which I have right here. If you are watching the live stream, you can type !book into chat to get a link to buy your very own copy from the University of Arizona Press. And if you're watching or listening after the fact, please check the episode description for that link. Faculty, staff, and students, please join me in saying thank you to Dr. Kelly Gonzalez for being on the show and telling us about the research he had to leave behind in Ready Player One.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Dr. Carlos Gabriel Kelly Gonzalez. As you mentioned, I am an assistant professor of English at Kennesaw State University out here in Atlanta, Georgia. What else?
So you're in the English department, which is there are games people scattered everywhere, but I always think it's really interesting when there are games people scattered in English departments because we think of games as being super interactive and not like books that you know what I mean? So it's like it's a fun one when you're like, I'm with the book people.
Yeah, it's funny because I see games as literature and I see literature being anything. And so I try to convince people that same thing, like we can read games like books. Yeah. I see some of my students in the chat. What's up, y'all? Shout out to my parents.
Aww.
Shout out to my fam in Mexico. What's up?
También tenemos un chat bilingüe. So
hey,
already
yes,
they're
sí, saludos.
Yeah. Salud. Which brings me to my next question, which is what you drinking?
Yes, I have some rosé. So what is it called? Prosecco rosé. So it's nice.
I am so excited because my dream when I started this late night academic talk show was that we would be like drinking scotch in leather armchairs talking about research. And you were the first. This is a monumental lore building moment because you were the first guest to actually tomar algo. So I'm really impressed. I'm very proud of you.
Thank you. Well, it's delicious. So I appreciate the invitation to let loose here at 9 p.m. on the East Coast.
That's right. So let's get started talking about our conflict of interest disclosures, which is a fun joke for academics in chat. There is no conflict of interest because this is my show and I can do whatever I want. But let's talk about, do you remember how we met? This is a question that I like to ask every single guest that comes on the program because I think it helps show grad students just how interconnected and, you know, games is a small community, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. Funnily enough, I actually reached out to you via email to ask you if you wanted to contribute to this co-edited collection that Dr. Regina Mills and I are working on. And you said no, that you couldn't because you mentioned, this is my husband's last name. I'm not Latina, and I was like, okay, well, thank you for your honesty. That was cool. But then we met at DIGRA in person, and that was really cool because I got to see you in action as president, and that was really nice. I think y'all are doing a great job. Side note with that, with the committee and the leadership committee there. So that was really cool to meet you and talk to you there. And then the final day, I mean, we were in Malta. That was pretty sick too.
Yeah.
The perks of being a profe. So that was nice. And then, you reached out to me, invited me to this program. So I think that was, lovely. So I appreciate the space you carve out for us.
Aw, you're so kind. And that's why I invite people on the show is to say nice things about me. Hey, my students, if you're listening. See, other people think I'm nice. Oh, we like to have fun here. All right, so let's get started. Let's start talking about this award-winning book, because right before the stream, you told me that this actually won an international award in 2024. Could you remind me of the name of the award, please?
Yes, it's the International Latino Book Award for Best College-Themed Book in English, and I won the gold. They don't tell you what you're winning; they just tell you you won something. And so on the day of the award ceremony, I showed up, and I know my family's there, my parents are there, and you, they call all of the people back to the back room, and so we're all waiting, and they name a couple people ahead of me, and I'm like, oh my god. They named the bronze and the silver, and then I knew at that point that I was going to win gold, and I was like already in tears. So that was really awesome. A humbling moment.
You know, when you said they told you that you won, but they didn't tell you what you won, in my head, I was thinking that there was like a prize, not the level of the award, but they were going to be like, and here's a gift card for Target, or I don't know what they would give you. I was trying to think of what kind of prize. Never mind.
Hey, a gift card would have been dope. Hey, the card, I'll take it.
Did you get a trophy?
I got a medal. Yeah, it was nice. It's I mean, I can grab it.
Yeah, you should. That's way more than I've ever gotten for literally anything.
It was great. You know, I was telling you, this is the first and only book on Latino game studies, and so
That's
this
amazing.
is the award I got.
That's so good.
It's quite cool. I bring it to class every semester to show my students, you know, what's possible. Because I wasn't always the smartest kid when I grew up. So just winning that is like chef's kiss.
It's so cool. It's such a nice way to validate what you're doing, right? Because a lot of times as academics, we don't get much validation.
No, not at all. I mean, we're always in our own heads thinking about how terrible our stuff is. So it was very validating.
So let's talk about this award-winning book, because I'm really excited. Huge congratulations on the publication. Huge congratulations on the award. Claro. Let's talk about how you start this book off, which I love. You start talking about your youth playing loteria with your aunties, and you describe loteria as Mexican bingo. And I think probably everyone in chat knows what loteria is. If not, do yourself a favor, open a web browser, Google search it, because it is a card game with a very distinct art style. And which you talk about in your book. And I think if you see a couple cards, you're going to be like, oh, I've seen that game around. I never knew what it was, if you don't already know what it is. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how, first of all, the decision to start with Loteria, and a little bit about the significance that the game has for you personally.
Sure. So, I mean, So I was trying to look back into my life, you know, and I'm like, man, what's up with the games in my life? And like storytelling. I'm a big storyteller. And I just kept going back to the same memory. My family, my tias on their many visits to the house, sitting around the kitchen table playing bingo, loteria, you know? And the stories they would tell. And I was like, and I was thinking back to it, and I'm like, well, this is really the first gaming experience that I had, and it was with my family, and it was socializing, like, you know, combining the social aspects that we love about video games into the tabletop, right? Because it is a tabletop, a card game, whatever it is you want to call it, right? But I distinctly remember, you know, sitting, like 5 of us seated at this table, you know, somebody on the kitchen counter, and my prima Jacqueline, or, you know, she's smoking a ciggy, and mi tia Blanca, she's singing the cards as she's throwing them down. And in reality, I'm just so fortunate to have been surrounded by so many strong women, their stories and the chisme that us men pretend we don't want to be a part of, but we really want to be a part of. So I love being able to be in those spaces and to, I grew up loving these women. So to this day, really no one babies me more than my tias. So gracias tias. And so I was included in their lives through gaming. I got to learn about them. We laughed hysterically through a game. And it reminds me of like all of the clips that I save with my boys who I play games with, and the shenanigans that we get into, and sort of the hilariousness of it all, and how it serves as a like direct parallel to playing loteria with my family, and the building of community through those stories that we tell, through the fun that we have. And that's why I begin the book in that way, because also it communicates cultural lessons that I think that are very important to consider when we're thinking about games. And that's one of the main points that I try to communicate in the book, is that we're receiving these cultural messages regardless of if we're paying attention or conscious of them. And so in that way, I learned a lot about masculinity really early on, you know, um, and a lot of the cards in Loteria reflect these really stereotypical masculinities that, just don't really capture the nuances or the positivity that we could strive for as masculine peoples.
Yeah, tell me about that, because in the chapter, in the intro, you mentioned El Catrín and El Valiente. Is specifically how they represent two different. I don't know if this is the exact word you use, but stereotypes of Latin masculinity. So Latinx. Apologies.
Sure, I think they're more like caricatures.
Okay.
In the sense, and I return to like Derek Burrell. He's in the book. I cite him. He writes about masculinity in video games, and he argues that masculinity in video games, how they're not a real thing, but instead a reference of an already fictitious perception of what masculinity ought to be. And so when I see valiente, it's supposed to equate like brawn and courage with like, which may insinuate violence. And when I see El Catrín, I see like, oh, this more gentlemanly, perhaps more willing to abide by respectability politics. And he also, to me, represents like this elite version of masculinity that has wealth, or that is wealthy. And so, but those aren't like real ways of, I mean, they are and they aren't, right? But there are more positive ways to enact masculinity, but we don't see those, or we only see caricatures of the types of masculinities that are acceptable or appropriate. So we either got to be brave or we got to be El Catrín, right? And El Borracho is another card that I talk about in the game. I mean, in the book. I always call it a game. I don't know why. But I talk about El Borracho and how El Borracho is literally like the biggest stereotype for Mexican masculinity, and it's seen across all Latinidades. So it doesn't matter if Mexican or not, all of a sudden we're heavy drinkers, especially men, and then there's a criminal aspect that's attached to it. And so these masculinities really aren't something that I want to reproduce, but I learned it anyways as a young child. And I was very fortunate that I had my tias around me and the women in my life to sort of combat those lessons that I was learning culturally from games like Loteria and other, video games, etc. But those cards, when I think about Loteria, I think about those cultural lessons and what it's teaching young men and everyone else, right? Because everyone absorbs those lessons.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful introduction to not only the book, but also to the story about the role of masculinity in gaming. So huge fan. So this is maybe a segue into talking about future current projects, which is the Loteria cards have a very distinctive art style, like I mentioned earlier. And I wondered if you did any research on the history of the game or on the history of the artwork that went into those cards that you want to talk about.
This is a great question, and I have to admit that like I did not research Loteria, and that's like an honest thing to say.
For sure.
And I say that because like Loteria is my life. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
my experience. I embody playing Loteria. I didn't necessarily need or think about having to go research it because I was like, all I had to do was like dip into my memory of playing the game. That being said, if I were to do it again, I think that's a great point to like say like perhaps that's some of the research that's left behind, right? That I could have gotten into it because there's so like afterwards. It's funny. I actually read about. I was a reader for a book on about Loteria.
Oh, fun.
And so that was really cool because I was like, yeah, damn, this is really sick. I could have like used some of this in here. What I do think about with that, with the art styles, is the way young people or new generations are repurposing Loteria for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so carving space to see themselves with new cards, rejecting the racist cards of old, creating new things, new ways of seeing that pertain to like millennials or Gen Z, etc. That's something I want to think about. Sorry, for my next project. So it's left behind, but it's coming.
Left behind but not forgotten.
Yes.
I love that. I'm someone who's obsessed with marginalia, and give me a footnote and I will read it and memorize it. And so I am obsessed with this footnote on page 39, where it's like it's the smallest thing ever, but I think it speaks to the humor and the reading this book is like, it feels like I'm sitting at a cafe with you, just talking, chit-chatting, but I'm learning a lot.
That's a
right?
great compliment. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. I love
Good.
that.
I meant it as a compliment. It's conversational in a way that is rare with academic books, but that sometimes people read that as it lacks, I don't know, rigor, but which is not at all what I'm trying to say. It's extremely rigorous. It's just approachable.
I appreciate that. No, and that was the point. So thank you for recognizing that.
Yay. There's a footnote on page 39 that says, and I'm going to read it exactly. In the 2014 FIFA World Cup, Mexico lost to the Netherlands because the Dutch player, Arjen Robben, flopped and dove to trick the referee into awarding the Netherlands a penalty kick. We will never forget. It was not a penalty. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about a little bit about the role of FIFA, the World Cup, and how Latinx gaming also ties into sports and national identity in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is literally just a footnote in your book, right? So I don't want to, grill you on literally a footnote, but I think you can't really talk about Latinx masculinity without bringing up the role of football, right?
No, I mean, yeah, I definitely think that there's something there. Like, I don't really care about sports too much, but when the World Cup comes around,
right,
forget it.
Yep,
I'm useless. I'm watching every game. I don't care what time. I mean, I usually watch like 90% of the games.
Yep.
It doesn't matter what time. And so, yeah, it becomes a big part. I mean, I remember watching those Mundiales, the World Cups with my family, huddled around, whoever was there visiting, we'd be watching the World Cup.
Yep.
And part of what in writing this book, I wanted humor to be all throughout it. I think as a Mexican American, there's a lot of humor in our lives, and we use that continually in our daily lives. And so I didn't want this book to be any different in that way. And this one is a gem for those of us who are World Cup fans, but this is specifically a gem for mi gente, for like my Mexican, siblings. Because I think you read a book and you see a footnote like this and you just see yourself in a way that perhaps other writing can't capture. And so I that's why I put it there. And it's funny because I say it all the time. I'm like, no fue penal. And I think that one really stuck to us because as Mexicans, we always hope to win the World Cup, and that squad was probably our last and only hope to do so, which is sad to say because I'm one of those guys, like when we do the World Cup brackets, I pick Mexico to go all the way,
Yeah,
even
yeah,
though I
yeah.
know that's not going to happen. So this time around, I might not do that actually. Um, but yeah, it's just one of those moments. It's just like I try to sprinkle a lot of these gems throughout, and some of them are in Spanish and some not, but the humor and sort of the conversational tone of it is what I'm trying to push forward through this book. And I think footnotes like this, and I'm so glad that you're talking about it. That's so cool. I think it helps to sort of infuse my personality into it, but also invite people to see themselves in humor. So I think that's really, I don't know, that's so cool that you want to even talk about that. I love it.
Oh, it's super fun. It's nice. It's like a nice little memory, right? It makes it feel more real. In chapter 1, you compare the act of playing a video game to an act of crossing a border, and you have a lot of personal memories. It's a really exposing and vulnerable chapter, actually, which I think helps that feeling of sitting at a cafe and talking. So I wanted to know if you could say a little bit more about the metaphor, especially I think now is the time politically
Sure.
where we should be talking about borders, right? And we, I stole my last name, so to speak, by marrying my significant other, but that I take this as having a responsibility to have these conversations and to use my whiteness and whatever platform I have, which it's Twitch, but whatever platform I have to try and speak out against injustices that are happening in the United States right now. But let's talk about how it's at least framed in your book. I won't put you on the spot to make any kind of political statement.
No, I mean,
So
it's necessary. I think it's necessary. I think the conversation, it's like in my classes this semester, I started out, I was like, this is impossible to be dispassionate
yeah,
about this subject. And I teach Latino studies classes.
yep,
And I tell my students that I'm like, why? Because this is my life. These are my people that are being rounded up. Like this
yep.
is, and you deserve someone who's going to speak to it directly. You don't deserve someone who's going to tiptoe around the thing. So I value that.
Yep.
Yeah, Sexelia del Rolo. I'll let you say that. Thank you. So like I knew that because I'm a storyteller, the border is always going to be something that makes its way into my works. Um, when I think about the border, I think about my life. Every time I go back home, I cross over, I see my tias. Crossing was central to my life, and so that every chapter begins with the sort of personal anecdote, this autoethnographic exploration of what the border means to me and how we can use that as a lens to build a little empathy as we embark on the rest of the chapters.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll talk about it in a couple ways in regards to borders and how I see them in video games, but like the ways developers see the world reproduce and create borders. So for example, like developers' worldviews are coded into the game. And if we imagine that as like a digital line in the sand, then we can see what they thought belonged and what didn't make it into the game. And
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes as Latinez, we never make it into the game. But
Yep.
when we do make it into the game, we're often stereotypes, right?
Yep.
That exists because developers are primarily white, fluctuating between like 70 and 80%,
Yep.
and around approximately 75% white men.
Yep.
So those are really reductive ways of being able to imagine marginalized communities in video games. And so because we often are stereotypes, they rob us of our humanity. And to me, this reproduces ideological borders as well. So we have the code of the border, right? But then there are also these ideological borders that are being communicated when, they make us the Latin lover trope, or,
Mm-hmm.
we exist to die right away, or et cetera, right?
Right.
And so that somehow Latinas can never really protagonize a story. And this has gone about the same way for, over 100 years, that we're not seen as American or American enough or worthy enough to be the protagonist, right? But I just want to say, as a news flash, like Mexican and Latinx were and always will be Americans. It's called the Americas,
Yep.
and I think it's pretentious and a lot of other things for United States of America to refer to ourselves as Americans when there's North America, South America, Central America, right? So and the Caribbean. So there's a lot of I got a lot of feelings about that. And I'll just say it's just people are ignorant to the realities of how we've existed in these spaces long before anyone else.
Yep.
And because of that, these borders, they really made me think about my time crossing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, well, what does it mean if it's a border, if these games are border or video games are borders, then we are crossing into these games. And then as players, we cross into the games and their narratives, and we play the part in the story, right? And so I started thinking about like, well, we're never a protagonist, so are players really crossing with us, or are they crossing through us? And then that made me think about like how we cross through. Like if you're a person of color in a video game, you're meant to be crossed through. You're a means to an end, and that happens a lot with many of the games that I talk about in chapter 1. In fact, almost all of them, they do the same thing. We're a means to an end. We're the white woman's bestie. We're the in Manny and The Last of Us 2, or we're the three. The introduction to make Nathan Drake seem really cool,
Right.
because he somehow ends up in a Panamanian prison, and there's like it's just. And so that's the way I see borders, right? That many ways, and I theorize borders in all sorts of ways in the book additional to this, but I think those are very strong ways to think about them, that developers create these games
Right.
where it's a line in the sand of who's included, and then also these ideological borders that are reproduced through these continual stereotypes that aren't even new. They're like all reproduced from film, right? It's just
Yep. Film and white supremacy, right?
Absolutely.
By the way, if you're watching this after the fact, I have to apologize. Chat is being really sweet. And so occasionally I'm listening and then I see a chat message and then I smile, but the smile's completely inappropriate for what you're saying. So I'm going to look like the worst human being ever in the VOD. It's because chat's being really sweet.
Sup, chat? I love it.
Chat's making me look like a monster. Okay, so speaking of talking about fun, happy things. So, to echo chat's sentiment, no human being is illegal. Borders are nonsense. I mean, we shouldn't have to say that. If you ever wonder where I stand on it, there you go. But I want to talk about my favorite part of the book. I have lots of favorite parts actually, but when you start talking about esquads and sachiwachis, I died. I couldn't. It's such a cool chapter to talk about online gaming and gamer terms, and then taking words in games and making them so that they're easier to say in Spanish when you're having a conversation with your friends is like, to me, one of the highlights of gamer culture. Like that is one of the coolest things when you see words forming in real time to address a need, a community need. So you get words like isquad and sachiwachi, and it's amazing. So let's talk about that. So how does transforming gamer terms into Spanish help bring Latinx culture into gaming spaces?
So one of the things that I love, so we're not in the games. So we're very Latinx, like we're very ingenious and resourceful people, right? And there's like a deep joy that we get from these moments. And the way I see it is that we're taking ownership of a medium that ignores us in every single way. We're the number one ethnic group to play video games in the United States. If you count Latin America, I mean, we're just giant consumers of video games. And so it doesn't make any sense for them to ignore us. And so because we're so ingenious, we find ways to insert our culture. And this is one of those ways, right? And so anytime Like we've the variation that made it into the book is esquad, but we'll go esquad. Like there's one of my boys in the chat, and he's like esquad. So it's just any way that we can write it, but it's always fronting the S, right? Yep. Because this is how we say sometimes, especially my cousins and my tias or anything like that. When we're speaking in English, right? S Sprite or S Squirt. And so that's just the language and how we roll, right? And so I don't know how we started that, but it was just let's a squad. We're not squadding up. Let's S squad. And so we do that, and that's one of the ways that we would sort of squad up in Warzone. This is the game that we would play most often. And so we're co-creating as Latine gamers. We co-create ways to see ourselves, right? And I don't remember who said it. Maybe it was Pablo who said Sachiwachi, or maybe it was Lee, my boy Lee. But Pablo did say, shout out Pablo, what's up? That Sachiwachi was like a potential tattoo. And I just imagined the little armor satchel, because that's what it is, right? It's the armor satchel that we call the Sachiwachi. Like, get the Sachiwachi, like, hey, there's a Sachiwachi over here. And that would be sick. So I'm down to get that tattoo. But it's like the story of my life, right? This way of Latina ingenuity being all around me, using whatever we have available to us to live, to thrive, to survive, whatever it is, we make it happen. And there's a Mexican and Chicana term that really encapsulates this attitude. It's called rascuachismo. RASQUACHISMO, rascuachismo. And it means to reuse, to repurpose, to make new, or to cobble together makeshift solutions.
Yeah.
That's Tomás Ibarra Frausto writes about it. Alicia Gaspar de Alba, Mark Derry, and Charlene Villaseñor Black. These are some of the scholars that I researched to think about this term. And so I coined in some pieces that are coming out this year, Rascua Gaming or Rascua Game. And it's one way that I find to talk about how we take ownership, because it's about survival. I'm not seeing myself. I don't see my culture. I don't see my people. Then I have to find ways to insert myself into the game, right? And so we do this. And I want to shout out my boy Lee, because he's one of my favorite players because of his ingenuity and creativity. Love you, man. So in Gran Turismo 7, it's a racing game. Latinidad doesn't exist, right? In fact, probably no culture exists. But Lee utilized the customization options in the game to create what's called a taxi libre, which is a taxi in Tijuana, in Baja California, the border town to San Diego. And he sent the clip to us, soundtrack to some banda. And it's like the most amazing thing, because we see him going through curves and the banda's playing in the background. And he also, like, we played together a little bit too. And he showed me he made a red taxi, which are like the vans. And it's just crazy to see those things brought to life in a game that probably never once considered us. And so these are the ways that we find how to insert our culture out of survival mode, right? Like, we just want to see ourselves in some way in these games that we love. And so those are some of the ways. I mean, there are other ways and things like that. I just didn't think of them, or I didn't write them down, but we constantly do this. And I think we're not unique in that way. I think many marginalized communities have to do this in order to see themselves in video games, which is a shame, right? I mean, and just points back to the sort of 70 to 80% of video game developers being white. It's a big problem. They don't see us.
Yep.
And so this is how we find a way to see ourselves.
I love it. I love it. So let's keep on the topic of language and talk about code switching. So you talk about Miles Morales in the Marvel's Spider-Man games. And I have to say, my kid's favorite Spider-Man, Miles Morales. So I was really excited when Miles Morales is in the book because I got to be like, look, your favorite characters in this book. So cool. But let's talk about code switching when it comes to Miles Morales, and the importance of language and spoken language to Latinx gamers.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I have to caveat this, and I do in the book. Like, Spanish is not the only way to be Latine,
Mhm.
but it is a central component, and it is the easiest way to materialize it inside of a game. Like, if you're thinking about Latinidad and you want to capture it in the game, language would be one of my. I'm not a developer. I don't know how to code games, but language would be like a central thing to do. All right, and Spanish is central to my life. It's central to Miles's life. We don't see that in the first Spider-Man game. In fact, there are no Spanish words uttered in that game, which is crazy to me. And it just means that they're not really thinking of Miles as a person. They're thinking of him as a commodity, right? And so they put him into the first game and they erase his Latinidad. And so with Miles, I see mostly missed opportunities to relate to Latinidad or Latinas in this way. Like, we can hear Miles's accent. The first words in the Miles Morales game are in Spanish, which is amazing. Like, they fixed that, right? And so we can see and hear his accent. And so to me, there could have been a mission where he explores the insecurities involved with expressing himself in Spanish, or where he deals with the realities of being Latina and Black. And so that's a huge missed opportunity because we often struggle with that, like first gen Latinez. Like, Spanish is not my dominant language,
Mm-hmm.
and I think in English, right?
Yeah.
Spanish is my first language, and so even I struggle at times to communicate in Spanish, even if it is my first language, and even if it is that even if I'm fluent, right? I'll
Mm-hmm.
never speak good enough or well enough for some. And again, that's a huge struggle in Latina communities, and to completely ignore that kind of matches their approach to Miles's identities, because they in the game, police officers don't exist. And so they really, Insomniac is just completely going away from intersectional identities in a way that is safe for them, because again, they're mostly white developers. They don't, I mean, God forbid they do their research and like actually talk to people in the community, right? And I had reached out to them too. I'm gonna throw them under the bus because I reached out to them while I was writing this, and they kind of just gave me several email exchanges and nothing else.
Mm.
And so to me, it really just showed that they don't really care. And Spider-Man 2, I haven't played it, and so that makes me an awful Spider-Man fan. But Spider-Man 2, one of the biggest things that I remember from when it came out is that they put the Cuban flag in Miles's room versus the Puerto Rican flag. And so again,
Don't
that's,
tell me that.
yeah, and
No.
they patched it. They patched it and apologized, right? And so again, that just tells me that they're not really thinking of Miles as a person. They're thinking of him as a commodity that is going to sell games. And this is the problem with that, because I love seeing Miles. I mean, the Noche Buena scene, the mission is the first mission in the Miles Morales game. It made me cry. I had never felt seen like that in any game ever, right? And so to like, because I don't celebrate Christmas, I celebrate Navidad, and we always celebrate on the 24th, which is Noche Buena.
Yep.
And so, like, I want to see Miles in the game. Do I care that they're commodifying him on some level? Yes. On another level, I'm like, damn, well, we exist some way. And so it's hard, because as a video gamer, you want to play those games. And as a Latina video gamer, we're never going to be satisfied until we're the ones telling those stories. And even then, sometimes we might miss it, because like I often say, and I say this in the book, just because we have a Latinx coder doesn't mean that they're not going to be reproducing misogyny or homophobia. And so in thinking about that, like, what we need is not just academics to be involved in writing teams, but we need people who like do this work every day, that live the lives of the characters that are being written. And we need writing teams to help with that.
I really appreciate you speaking to developers, because one of the the proudest I am of the stream is that it is a resource for game developers who really would genuinely, in their heart of hearts, want to read your book, Ready Player One, but can't because they're working, a full time. Academics, we have to read books because that's literally part of our job. But when you're a game developer working between 40 and 60 hours a week, plus you have a family and da da da. But what they can do? They can put this on while they're at work, or they can put on the Spotify podcast as they're driving to work, and people do. And so, hey, if you're listening and you're a developer, thank you, because I think you're this is a step in the right direction, right? To inform yourself and to learn about what's missing in the games that we love. So, and your love for
hit me up. Hit me up.
Yeah. Absolutely. You should contact Dr. Kelly Gonzalez. Okay, so let's talk about I keep saying my favorite part of the book, so let's just now it's starting to feel a little meaningless, but you come up with this term called digital mestizaje, and I wonder if you could talk about what the term means in thinking about the race of characters in the games that we play, and of course our own race as well. And we kind of been talking sobre this the whole time, right? So let's talk about
it. So I want to start by saying in the book I write about this, and I explore the tensions with mestizaje, and I even say that even though I feel that this is a sort of recuperative project in the sense that I'm trying to take this power back from this word, that it may not be the case and it may not be possible. And so I'm open to those criticisms if people have them. But I see digital mestizaje as a new way of seeing that argues visual consumption via digital means creates these cultural mixtures within players that can lead to tensions between the constructive and the productive, and the destructive and the reductive. And so what I mean is that it may, because it's not always, it's not always going to impact people, right? But it may encourage more nuanced readings of how we consume and produce knowledge in digital spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And so to think about digital mestizaje is to front the tension in how Mexican communities deal with our history of colonizer and colonized.
Yeah.
We wrestle with the racial and cultural mixing that is mestizaje, and digital mestizaje is a way to ask others to wrestle with how we all consume and produce digital content. And so mestizaje has a horrible past, and it's still done today, right? This way of eliminating populations and indigenous populations or brown and black people through forced, through rape and other methods, right? Mm-hmm. Thinking back to the conquista.
Mm-hmm.
And if we could take that and start to think about the mixtures in a way that can produce these new ways of seeing, then we could start to really embrace that no issue is so black and white. So there's a question. The mestizaje is, again, it's basically a colonial tool used by the Spanish and many other, where they want to eliminate the indigenous population through rape and mixing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And mixing is often, and that's like a nice way to say it, right? But it's not mixing; it's forced,
right?
Rape or forcing, what are those surgeries to make women infertile, right? Something like this, hysterectomies. There you go, like removing the uterus, etc. When people don't want that, all of these ways of destroying a people because you're afraid of what they might, become, etc. Right?
Yeah.
So this is why I'm conscious of the fact that even though I do see it as a positive step forward, as a new way of challenging, not just Latinx, but all people, to think about how we consume digital things. That's where we're going. That's where we're moving towards, right? And we're already there. And so we got to think about this more responsibly. And so if I have to think about my history with mestizaje, well, everyone should too. And we got to think about it and what are we missing when we, view something online? And what's behind it, who made it, like who's being represented, who's not being represented. So all these questions start to circulate, basically from the idea that it is not just one thing or the other, but it can be both of these things. I'm hopeful for digital mestizaje to be that term that ushers in a new way of seeing. It's quite a lofty goal, I know, and one that, again, does not discount the terrible history. In fact, I wrestle with that history in the book too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really important conversation and dialogue to be having. So we're wrapping up on the last couple questions here. I want to know, because it's the literal title, who is Player Juan? Or phrased differently, what is the designed Latinx identity in gaming?
Yeah, so when I think of Player Juan, I think of this made-up person, this made-up character. And it's not just one person or character, but it's like this amalgam. I call it a blob of stereotypes that just are reproduced from film that really limit the spectrum of Latina humanity and possibility. And so I was inspired by Ready Player 2, Shira Chess's work, and where she argues how women gamers are seen as player 2, a designed identity based on how developers imagine women as gamers and how they might play or what they might play. And so in a similar sense, they imagine who Latinos might be inside games, and the only thing that they, or rather the things that they most rely on, is that we are there to be exotic. If it's settings, then we're there just for contexts, for white heroes to destroy. We're meant to be recognizable through our proximity to criminality, right? So like I hate Tomb Raider. Shout out to Tomb Raider. When I played that game, I said I'm gonna hate play this game because I knew how terrible it was gonna be. And there's a moment with this kid. He takes this, like, I drank before I was of legal age, of course, right? But like, to put it in a video game and to say, and like to ignore the child theft of the tequila, like, somehow we're talking about Laura. I was just as mischievous as a child, Laura Croft says. And you're like, oh man. So I that's how I see it. And I mentioned that, like, the Player Juan is how mostly white developer base sees us, because they don't know anything about Latinidad. They don't have to, like, just how they don't have to know about gender or race, misogyny. They don't have to know these things because it doesn't impact them, right?
Yeah.
So they think, and so they imagine how we might appear, how we might behave, and it's almost always like I'm watching a terrible, film from the 90s where we're just gangbangers and cholos, and there's nothing wrong with being a cholo. That's an aesthetic. I love it.
I mean, yeah, let's be very clear.
Yes. But that's awesome. But to attach that to always be criminal is the problem, right? And so we're just reproduced in these really criminal ways always.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. That's very well put. I really like comparing it to the idea of Ready Player Juan. The title, I actually didn't just connected that. That's very clever. I did connect that at first, and I love Shira Chess's book, so that's really cool.
Shout out to Shira Chess, because I mean, I thank all of the people, all the authors in my book, in my acknowledgments, because without them, I wouldn't have been able to write this, and so I'm really grateful to the people who have taught me how to see video games in ways that made this book possible.
It's incredible. So humble. Let's talk about something you hate, because
things
you're being too nice. So I need you to talk about something that you hate.
Okay.
I'm teasing. But the next question I have is about Laura Cruz. And so I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the history of the character Lara Croft and how she was originally pitched as Laura Cruz, and then
man. It was so upsetting to hear this news, or to uncover this, to unearth this, right?
Yes.
And I have complex feelings, so I'm just, Laura Cruz, imagine. Let's start there, right? She's a South American munitions specialist, someone who could have been, instead of robbing tombs, saving them. I don't know if the gameplay would have changed, right? But
Right.
even then, right, it changes because developers are like, Lauda might be too hard to pronounce for white folks. Let's change it. And so at the time there was a lot of emphasis on like American heroes or American, etc. And so they were like, well, let's just go as far off as we can. Let's make her British. Let's make her a woman. Let's make, and so they settled on the OG colonizer. I always call the British, and also the Spanish too, but they could fight over that title. But like, so here are the positive. We could have had a Latina woman headlining one of the longest lasting action adventure series across every generation of gaming. It's 30 years now. In fact, there's a new book out that talks about the 30 years of, it's all about Lara Croft.
Yep.
Now that's great. So what would be different? Like, for starters, we'd have more than 7 playable Latina characters across 50 years of gaming, and perhaps even more Latina designers and coders and creatives of all genders, that would have been awesome.
Right.
But Laura's hypersexualization was always a problem. And as a woman character, like, she continues to be fetishized of her body. And that becomes insanely problematic when we think about Latinas, because Latinas historically have always been hypersexualized and turned into these racialized sexual objects in film. And so now imagine that with Laura Cruz being hypersexualized in all these really disgusting ways. And I don't even want to consider like all the hidden atrocities that they're disguised as achievements or Easter eggs that could have existed for like the supposed male audiences if Lara would have been Laura, right? And yeah, here we go back again. Like, how impactful would the remodel of Lara Croft been for Laura Cruz?
Yep.
Like, goodness gracious, that would have changed the game in so many ways. But I'm like, would that remodel have happened if she were Latina?
Right.
Would they have doubled down and and sort of catered to that sort of cis white male audience that they think is the sort of, player one, to be frank. And so I want to believe in the radical presence of Lara Croft. But as you can see, it troubles me. It's not cut and dry. And there are many good things that could have come out from it, but I don't see how, like, it would just been even more toxic than what it already has been.
Because we can't have nice things.
No, we can't. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Fuck.
Welcome on in, folks who are just joining us. We've got about 5 minutes left. We are talking about Latinx masculinities in gaming, and we have one question left that we can end on, which, unless chat wants to pop in a question real quick, which is what got left behind. So this is the title of the program, The Research That Got Left Behind, your book, Ready Player Juan. What did you have to cut for word count? What got left on the cutting room floor? Any juicy details about this book that you want to share?
So I that's great, because I feel very fortunate in the sense that it was received very well by my readers. And so I didn't have to cut. Instead, they invited me to add more research on they wanted me to cite somebody on Spider-Man, and I did. I said my friend and colleague Regina Mills, and so I went back and did a little extra work to cite more people. Something that I could have, the project was masculinities, right? But I could have sort of talked more about Latinas. Something to think about for future projects. That's something definitely I want to think about. One of my advisors, she asked me, well, what if that's player Juan, then who are Latinas? And I'm like, well, damn, I think Latinas probably would also be somehow included in that. And so, is it player Juana? I don't know. Juane? I don't know. But I was very fortunate in that this was my dissertation, and I worked on it as if it were going to be my first book. And so I ignored a lot of the steps, like, fronting your literature review as a graduate student, doing all that stuff. And so I felt very fortunate in that I didn't have to make too many cuts. What I'm interested in the future is thinking about artistic practice in video games. So that's that's going to be my next monograph. I'm very excited about that. I haven't started yet, but I will. But I'm very fortunate. I think if I were to just go back to the loteria question, that's probably something that I could have done more. So think about more about loteria and combine that with my embodied experiences.
I love it. I'm waiting for an art history book on loteria, which I'm sure has been written, but I want your version for gameplay analysis as well.
Interview my tia, as somebody said. That's cool. I do. Oh man, don't need to get me started. I would love to.
Yeah. I mean that's the sequel. It writes itself, really. Okay, so that has been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your book with us, for talking about Latinx masculinities in gaming and all the cool stuff about language. I really appreciate the book because, as someone coming from a sociological background, I know language is important, but I just don't have the depth of knowledge or study that you do. Being in an English department, right? You can talk about language in a much more sophisticated way. So I learned a lot from the book and also from our interview.
Well, thank you. That's mighty kind.
That. Okay, so we are at the 1 hour mark. It is sadly time to say goodbye to the stream and to each other. So please, chat, join me once again in thanking Dr. Kelly Gonzalez for his time, his patience, and his research. Profe, do you have anything that you would like to plug? Any new publications or your social media?
Yeah, profecarlitos.com is my website. That's like my handles on Twitter. I don't use that much. Instagram, I need help. I need to get off that thing. But hey, you can find me on those. Some message. I do have I have some lovely pieces coming out. I was invited to contribute to a keywords collection by NYU. It's on the word Latinx and Latine. And so I've been able to take, speaking of like mobilizing our privileges, we talked about that earlier. Like, I feel like that was a great opportunity to speak directly to everyone who has who's similarly privileged as myself and more, right? So that one's coming out probably next year. I'm not sure. I wrote this piece on Latinx fandoms. It's like this trilogy by Frederick Aldama. That's it's part of it. There's Latinx Cine and Latinx TV. I'm in those as well. But Latinx fandoms, I wrote this really personal, autoethnographic, and really autobiographical piece.
That's so cool.
I'll give you a sneak peek. It's called Nintendo Cul-de-sacs and Basketball Jones, a homie's journey across fandoms. So it gets really personal and theoretical, which is something I'm going to continue to do. And also shout out to my homie and colleague, Dr. Regina Marie Mills. We've been working on Coded Latinx gaming and game studies in North America, which is the first collection of its kind. And that one we're expecting it to be out in late 2026 or 2027. We're looking at 2 presses right now. I have a piece in there on The Last of Us, both the show and the video game. And then just the last one, well, 2 actually. I wrote a piece on God of War this year. I'm looking to release that sometime soon. I gotta edit it and send it out. But it's thinking about like Asgard and the hostility of white gods and their policing of a cybernetic border. I'm so busy. Yeah, I know. It's crazy, right? And then somebody said in the chat. And then also DIGRA is Call for Papers is very exciting. Digital Games Research Association is about pleasure in games. And so I'm finally going to get to write about Diablo 2 and the pleasure I get of playing this insanely old game. Yeah, so those are the things. I thank you so much.
No, I love it. I love it so much. And thank you for plugging DIGRA. You should be on payroll. If DIGRA had a payroll, we don't have payroll. But thank you for saying nice things about the conference. And I do appreciate that the academics in chat are like, oh, you are doing a lot. So if no one's told you that, you're doing a lot. You're doing great. And it's awesome because we need more of your publications out there in the world. Another
Thank
trip
you.
to Malta? No, this one's in Southern Ireland. So it'll be fun. Okay, so you plugged your social media. We got that. Great. Thank you so much to Shawn, Pierre, and Adrianna Poindexter for the creation and use of the theme song, Nifty Chris, the Twitch mod for our classroom management, and to you, viewers and listeners. Without all of you, this production would not happen because there'd be no one to stream to. So I appreciate your support. Listeners, viewers, chatters, if you liked this stream or this VOD or this pod, please make sure you're following with notifications on so that you know when we are live again and when the next recording goes up. If you're listening after the fact, you can head over to twitch.tv /professor_Ashley and follow to catch the next stream when we're live. You can also find me on almost all social media platforms as Professor_Ashley. The Research Left Behind has started its second season, so this is episode 2 of season 2. We will be live again on November 6th with a double feature. So we have Tracy Fullerton and Matthew Farber talking about their new book, The Well Played Game, which I just finished reading today. It's great. And if you aren't already on the Discord, please join so you can stay up to date on the program and when we will next be live. Good night, everyone, and I will see you on November 6th. Bye. Thank you.